welcome to the Rejection Diaries. My name is Stuart White. We are now on to episode 9, and today we're going to be focusing on process and not outcome, and how process can help dictate more positive outcomes if we forget about the outcome itself. So our main two objectives for today's podcast will be to discover how to measure your worth and progress in a healthy way, and how focusing purely upon those processes and letting the outcomes take care of themselves will more likely result in a more positive outcome for us. Now, often our dreams as writers are very outcome based. We all dream of publishing deals and book launches and seeing our name in the cover, becoming bestsellers, all these kind of things. And all of those are very much outcomes. They are things that are the result of a lot of time and effort and hard work. And when we see other people having all these things, we naturally hope that one day they'll happen for us too. I'm guessing that's the reason why you follow Right Mentor, why you listen to the podcast. You're hoping for this for yourself one day. But I suppose it's a little bit like the iceberg metaphor, where we only see the tip of it. And we see those authors being published and doing well in the charts and having their book launches. And, it's brilliant to see it for them. But we don't see a lot of what has come before and what's gone into it to get them to that stage. And aside from obviously the very few and the rare author who will be quite honest about their journey and will give you more of an insight into how they got to where they are, most of the time we just see that sort of magical space unicorn at the end of the rainbow. That's when they become published and had all the accolades and so on. But we don't see the process that has gone in to producing that outcome. I think as well, I'm trying to think. That's right. The old saying, there's an old saying, isn't there, that says you should enjoy the journey and not the destination. It's all about the journey and not the destination. And I think as a writer, that's so true. I mean, we spend so much of our time. I mean, the journeys are, for some of us, are so long. And we spend so much time on the journey that if we forget about that and focus only on the destination, then we're going to lose some of that momentary enjoyment, living in that moment. And I think today that's what we're going to be discussing, is how we can take more advantage of that and take greater enjoyment out of the process and try not to worry so much about the outcome, whether that outcome is positive or negative. Because if we really love the process, then yes, the outcome matters, but it matters a little bit less because we've enjoyed all that's come before it. I think conversations I have with published authors at the moment, they often involve, and this comes in almost every email that I exchange with them, they involve a line that says, I have a huge deadline coming up, so blah, 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 blah. And so for them, they are very much focused on the process. Even though they're published, or they might be bestsellers, or they might be doing very well, they don't linger for long upon that outcome. They very quickly get their mindset back to the process. And for them, maybe that's a case of they have to, because they've got the deadline and they'll be in big trouble if they miss it. But it's also a good mindset for those of us who aren't published, is just to get back in the saddle and get ready to embrace that journey far more. Embrace the lead up, the process, the things that we do every single day to work on our books and our stories. And perhaps we just need to say, well, actually, this is the part that we need to focus upon and enjoy more. So in this episode, we will look at the process, all the processes that are involved in writing a book, and some of the best tips and things to do and not to do to help with that, and how by focusing only upon that, we'll be more likely to get the desired outcomes, the things that we want at the end of this process. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit about how we can measure our own worth and progress in a healthy way, because that's important. I think especially when you're unpublished, you're not you're not sort of as goal driven perhaps as those who are published. They have got their deadline. They've got to get this in for by this date, and they have to they've got their pitch, their concept, and so on, approved from early stage and so on. So it's a very different mindset to what us unpublished writers are doing every day. So how can we measure our own worth and progress in a healthy way? First of all, things to avoid at all costs. And you'll have heard this a lot, and it's hard to do, and we all do it at times. But if we can avoid it, then please do. And that is comparisons. Now, that's whether that's comparisons to the person in your writing group who's prolific and is producing a book every 3 months, where that and their prose is beautiful, and they write characters with depth, with no effort at all the way through to our writing heroes, who we see their outcomes, their books that are published, their lists that they get on, and so on. Avoiding comparison to those people is an absolute paramount. Every single person has different circumstances, and to compare two people's processes is like comparing the biomechanics of or the running gait of a cheetah and a gazelle, because although both are very fast, they do have very different biomechanics. So, for example, if a cheetah was to run like a gazelle, then it would struggle. It wouldn't have the deft-footedness or the light-footedness that it requires, or the stride per second that a gazelle has. Whereas if the gazelle tried to run like a cheetah, it would find its hind legs are just not powerful enough to produce the force required to bundle the organism forward and keep it going as fast. Now, they're both fast. They're both able to run way faster than a human could, for example. However, they do it in very different ways. And the point being that any two writers at any stage, no matter how similar the work they produce is, no matter how similar they are in all other ways, they will almost always have very different processes. And comparing yourself to your process to the process of another person is not healthy. I have very prolific writing friends who write a lot more than me. They write a lot faster, and they are that's brilliant, and I'm really happy for them. They produce a lot of books, and and so on, and that's great. And it's only by not comparing myself to them that I'm able to do anything, because I would just give up if I thought I had to write 3 or 4 books a year like some of them do. I don't think I could cope with that constant need to churn things out. And actually, maybe the reason I'm not able to do that is due to some issue with my own process, or it might just be that my circumstances are different, and I have to do things in a different way. We're all different people, and we're all unique, and we have our own ways of doing things. I think as well, comparing things like, as I mentioned before, word counts or writing every day. Writing every day, that, like, honestly, see, for me, that is the worst piece of writing advice that is out there. Telling people to write every day is slipping a noose around their neck every morning and telling them that they only get out of it if they produce words. And for me, that's not healthy. Like, it might be the motivator that works for some people, but for me, that is not healthy. I would feel that slowly tightening around me as I woke up in the morning. I would have to feed my children, get them out to school, but I wouldn't have the time to do it, and therefore I would feel constrained by it the entire day. It would affect my mood. It would affect all the other aspects of my life. Whereas occasionally I get blocks of time, especially in the evenings, where it's all quiet and so on, and I'm able to get the words down. But that's not even every evening. Other nights I have things on, and so on. And so I think that, for me anyway, that's a terrible bit of advice, is to tell people to write every day. I think what they mean when they say that is to find a writing routine or habit, or find what works for you. And I think that's a much better bit of advice. Find what works for you. When can you put aside in your own the time in your own life to get writing, and that might be like once a week, it might be a couple of times a week, or once a month intensely for a whole weekend. Whatever works for you is what you have to do, and I don't think necessarily, as I say, that advice is the best. So, what are the other things that we can do to help us with our process, with our routine? Things like setting targets can be good. You might say, I want to finish this draft by X date. That's quite good. Being more specific would be more helpful. What's your weekly target? What's your monthly target, etc. That helps to keep you on track. It doesn't work for everyone, but it does work for some people. Again, I spoke about before, but about not comparing yourself to other people, but at the same time, I think competition can often be a healthy motivator for people. And when maybe a writing friend is making good progress, I think that can rub off on people around them. And that competition, someone says, "Oh, I wrote 5,000 words this week," and you might have written 4,500, and that maybe motivates you to sit down and get over the 5,000 mark for that week, or whatever works. But setting targets, I think, is incredibly useful. And as I say, it doesn't need to be massive word counts. It can be simply sitting at your computer, marinating the story in your head, writing down notes, doing a little bit of editing each day. Whatever is useful for you is still okay. It's still valid. And I know that I've seen a few friends on Twitter recently actually posting up things like, "Oh, I'm so behind on X," or I feel like I've not done enough work on Y recently," and part of me says that's okay. It is all right, unless someone is breathing down your neck with a deadline. I don't think it's the end of the world if it takes a few more days or a few more weeks. Try and enjoy the process and not put too much pressure on yourself, I think, is the biggest bit of advice. And that leads me on nicely to the next bit of advice, which is, and I'm a total hypocrite here because I don't actually do any of this myself, but it's to forgive yourself. So if you miss a day, that's okay. If you are not feeling in the mood for it and you need to take a week or two off, that's also okay. I think the most important thing about writing is to associate it as best you can with positive feelings. And if you are being hard on yourself for missing a writing day, or for falling behind, or for not being in the mood for it, then you're just exacerbating those negative feelings that surround your writing, and that gives that sort of association. So every time you come to write, it brings up, it drudges up those negative feelings, and I don't think that's particularly healthy or productive for us. So forgive yourself. Just say it's okay. I'm not writing today, but I'll do it whenever. And do try and set aside a date or a time to do it, and try and get it done then. But also forgive yourself for the odd time that you aren't able to do it, because that's okay. We all have rubbish days. We all have days where things suddenly crop up. So that is absolutely fine, and you must, even though I don't personally do it myself, you must forgive yourself for these particular things. And the last little bit of advice, which I hope, or a little tip for now, which I hope is really useful, is to block out what an agent or editor or other publishing person might want, or what you think they might want, which is probably more to the point. Now, this one might seem a bit counterintuitive and might seem quite difficult to do, but ultimately, so many of them say things like, I've seen agents say things like, "I don't know what I want until I see it," or "I'm just looking for a great story that I can get my teeth into," or something incredibly vague like that. And one big reason for books not selling when you go on sub to editors is them saying, "Oh, get a similar title to yours, something that's very similar on the shelf already, or something that's scheduled to come out," and so they don't take it on. And I guess one way to avoid that kind of thing is to, well, I mean, there's no real way to avoid that. That's just bad luck. But one way to avoid trying to write to the whims and likes of people whose own whims and likes will change over time is to write something only for yourself. And I say this all the time, and the older I get, and the slightly wiser that I get about these things, the more I think I need to be just writing what I love, write for myself, write for kids who are absolute nerds like me when I was younger. That is who my niche is, and I'll write for them. And if it doesn't work out, then I'm still getting a greater sense of happiness. I'm still enjoying the process more because it's for me and for kids who were like me when I was younger. And yeah, if it doesn't get past the proverbial gatekeepers, then that's something I'll learn to live with, because I'm doing the thing that makes me happy rather than the thing that I think I should be writing. And I think that's so important. So forget about the publishing people. Of course, they matter later on. But during the actual writing stage, during the process of writing a book, you would do well to completely block it out. I don't think it's helpful to sit there and overanalyze what Agent 1 said in an interview last week, or what Editor 2 said in a magazine article that you saw about what they're looking for. Just write the very truest and most you book that you can, and your own unique voice will shine through. And I genuinely believe that will give you the greatest chance of a positive outcome with your story. So, leading us on to the last part of the program today, what are some of the things that we should be focusing upon during the process stage, during the production of our novel? What do they look like for someone who doesn't necessarily have the normal sort of stages and processes and timeline that a published author might have? As you know, they go through the various. They'll hand in the first draft. They'll go through structural, developmental edits, then chapter edits, then maybe character, and so on, down to line edits, copy edits, blah blah blah, and proofs. They have a sort of whole process going on. But for us as people who are just doing this for ourselves, we don't have a professional in our corner talking us through things. What are some of the things that we could be focusing upon when we're writing our story that might help us to keep our eyes on the process and not on the outcome or the prize at the end of this? So some of the ones I've come up with. When drafting, and actually when coming up with the initial concept, I think this is a really helpful tip. Is just to make sure you focus on the story above all else. So sometimes people they have an idea of something, they have a place or a thing that happens, an event or whatever, or a character, but they don't necessarily have a story yet. And by that, I'll explain what I mean by that in a little second. But they've got a snippet of something, and sometimes they take that snippet and they go headfirst into writing the story. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes it goes perfectly and smoothly, and none of that needs to be edited or cut out. You don't have to sit and replot halfway through, and that's perfect if that works out for you. But if you're like me, when I've tried that in the past, I've ended up just chucking away half a first draft or stopping at 10,000 words and having absolutely nothing else to say because I've no actual story. I've just gone off in the briefest little glimpse of an idea or a place or a setting or a person or whatever it happens to be. So focus on the story above all else. So a character, and this is what story is essentially. A character must overcome something, and it must be really difficult for them to do, and they should grow in some way to achieve it. Now, for me, anyway, and based on everything I've read about story craft, that is the basis of every good story. And so, when we work through our own stories, keeping that at the forefront of our minds will definitely improve the process. It will keep us laser focused upon the story, which is the thing that matters, and we won't veer off into other areas that ultimately might not get cut, might not make it. They might get cut because they're not part of the main strand of the story. You have to forget about how beautiful a particular sentence might be, or how many dialogue tags you have, or that there's little description in a scene. You just have to keep reading, keep writing, keep focusing on the story, and then you can focus on those other things in a different part of the process. But during this initial Drafting stage, story is king. It is the thing that is going to keep the spine of the story straight and is going to stop lots of jutting vertebrae from coming out too far from the spine and keeping them all encased in a linear progression. Tip two, and some of you might roll your eyes when I say this, but it's learning storycraft and continuing to learn it and relearning it and going over it and over it and over it. I personally do this probably excessively. I probably go too far in terms of that. But the one thing I always do is revisit stuff every time I go through spells of writing, and I'm quite an intense bursty kind of writer. Like I'll not do anything for a month, and then I'll work really hard for 2 or 3 weeks. You'll forget some of the storycraft, in between those stages, even if you've read the book a month ago. So just to keep revisiting that, I always put little tags. If I read it on my Kindle, I'll highlight it, and it's on the little notes when I go back and look at the book. However you want to do it, keep them at the forefront of your mind. Sometimes it's nice to write down little snippets from the book, little great bits of advice to keep at the forefront as you're writing the book. Now, craft books, for me anyway, they'll really help you with character development. They'll help you with plot, structure, and just how to ensure that you're really amplifying and getting the most out of your story. They make things which maybe would be potentially cut in your story into something greater and something you have to keep in because it's so good, just by applying some of the principles and the writing exercises that they suggest in these books. I really couldn't recommend and emphasize the importance of them more. Now, I know, as I say, some of my writing friends will be listening to this or not, but if they are, they'll be rolling their eyes. They know I go on about this all the time, and they'll be like, "Come on, Stuart, lay off it." And some of the things that they say to me is they say when they read craft books, they find that confuses them. They start feeling like they're not doing all the things that are in the craft book in their story, and therefore they start to feel inadequate. Like their story isn't good enough. Like they need to be doing all of these various things that the books talk about. And I think a good analogy here is, I guess it's about going into a dark cave. Would you go into the dark cave and feel your way around and hope for the best, or would you go in, with a full armory of tools and a bright flashlight and probably several flashlights to give yourself the greatest chance of making it through? Now, you might not use all the tools, you might not use all the flashlights, you might not use everything that you've taken with you, but to have them there means that you can draw upon them when you need them. But you'll only have them if you bring them all with you. And I think it's the same with craft books. You've got to read them all. You've got to just sit down and commit to it and learn everything, so that you've got all the various tools. I think if you try and implement all of them, you're never going to be able to do that. I think that's virtually impossible. And in fact, you won't need to implement all of them. Some of, especially my writing friends that I'm referring to, they are super talented. They are very, very good storytellers by heart. They are great at developing really empathetic and deep characters without really having to refer to the books. And you can tell it's just a natural ability that they have. Anyway, and I'm going to stop talking about craft books in a minute, but they are reluctant, and that's the one thing I would say is, fully arm yourself, give yourself all the tools, and you only need to use one or two of them. It's not something that you have to apply in full. But you know what? I would say reading craft books is a good idea before you start writing your draft. I think it's a good thing to read while you're redrafting. But actually, I would agree with them. Maybe during your first draft, it's not a good time, midway through it, to start getting into a craft book, because you will start to doubt yourself and second guess. And when you're halfway through a draft, that's not actually particularly useful. So either before you start drafting or when you're doing the rewrites is when I would suggest getting stuck into that storycraft. So moving on, because I could talk all day about this, but we are running low on time now. So try not to rush getting the book out is the next bit of advice, and important part of the process. Except it's going to be long. It's going to be a long process. You'll need to let it rest at times. You'll need to get other people to read it, and there'll be a space of a couple of weeks between that. You'll probably have to rewrite large chunks of your book and throw them away. Accept that that's going to happen. This is all fine and part of the natural, healthy process of writing. Some people write the first draft and then they discard the entire thing. Just it's okay if that happens. That is how even the very best people write a book. I think for me personally, rushing to get the book out before it's ready is cheating the process a bit, and when you do that, the outcome is unlikely to be positive. I know personally for me, when I've tried to cut corners in the process, it's not a good look. When you get 50 form rejections from all the agents, and it's something that you really believed in and you thought was a great story, but over time you've come back to realise that you rushed it, you didn't give it the due process, you didn't do everything you should, it needed another couple of rewrites at least, it probably needed a large section taken out as well. All of this stuff comes with time, and so I think when you rush the process, you miss these things, and that can be particularly disastrous for the outcome at the end for you. And the last bit of process advice, which is something I've only just started doing recently based on a bit of advice given to me from someone else, which is to never accept your first idea. So while you're writing your book, whether that's the first draft or the rewrites, the edits later on, if you think X should happen, or you think X should have this character trait, or X should respond in this way, or whatever you are thinking for your story, try not to accept the very first idea that pops into your head, or at the very least list at least a couple more. Often when we write our stories, we're drawn from, whether we know this or not, we're drawn from our past knowledge and experience, which has come from someone or something else that we have also taken from their past knowledge and experience, and it's been passed on to them and passed on to them and so forth. And it's the same with stories. And when we accept the first thing that comes into our head during a process about our characters or what happens next, we're often taking the most common idea from our past experience and memories, and often not even just our own past experience and memories, from other people's. And so we tend to go down this sort of repetitive path, which makes it quite predictable for the reader, in terms of what is going to happen next. So pause, then think, what else could happen? What could we do differently here? What could be unexpected or surprising for the reader or for the character? And list those. Obviously, a longer list is better. If you can get 4, 5, 6, that's amazing. But at least 2 more, and then think about which one is perhaps the least trodden path and the least expected, but obviously still within the logic of the story and what you'd expect from the character, and go in a different path. And if you alter this part of your process, and as I say, it's something which I have only started doing recently, but it's yielding what I think are some brilliant results with my writing. I'm definitely challenging myself, challenging the way I write, and therefore hopefully doing things that are a little bit more unexpected and surprising, and that hopefully will be a reward for the reader ultimately when they get to look at this story, if they ever do. So if you alter this part of the process, then you'll find your stories take new and unexpected paths, and you get very different story outcomes. And changing this part of the process, I hope, will change the ultimate outcome further down the line when you send the work out, and when you are at the, oh, do I get an email for a full, or do I get a form rejection back? We hope for the former, obviously, and hopefully some of those ideas and tips and so on that I've given you for the process will help you to improve that process, and ultimately that will have an impact on the outcome later. But I just know that for me personally, trying to apply all this stuff, it definitely has improved my process, and I'm thinking less and less about the outcome, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing, this part of it, a lot more than I ever have before, because I know that I've definitely always had that little, that little spectre in my shoulder that has been constantly whispering in my ear and saying, "Oh, I don't know if an agent's going to like this. I don't know if that's going to do very well. That's definitely going to be rejected when you send it out." And that's not a very good place to be. So if there's one bit of take home advice from today's podcast, it would be that we must try to enjoy the process, and when we do, the outcome stops really mattering, or it matters just a little bit less, and that ultimately in the long term will help us cope better with rejection when it comes our way. Thanks very much for listening to episode 9 of the Rejection Diaries. Today we focused on process, not outcome. My name's Stuart White. Thanks for joining us, and may the force be with you.